State Representative John Patterson, hello.
My pleasure. Pat Williams has changed.
Pat Williams has changed a lot.
Yes.
Still has the full of hair though.
I'm in the presence of the video Viper here.
I'll be signing autographs later.
Yeah. Speaking of Pat, I got to tell you something. I was at the Cognac Business Expo
Right?
a couple weeks ago.
You're at everything.
Oh, I tried to be.
Yeah.
And a few women came up to me and said, "Well, hi, John. It's good to see you here, but where's Pat? Where's Pat? Where's Pat?" That's all I heard. He is like...
Are you his keeper?
No, but I realize that he has quite a following out here, and especially amongst those women who see him as sort of on a pedestal. So I was going to tease him about that. His fan club demands more.
He should be back tomorrow. As far as I know, he'll be back tomorrow. But he had a little dental work, surgery, and...
he was dreading that last time.
He was, yes. And he sent me an email last week saying he was sick of the whole thing and he was on pain meds. So,
oh, gee.
So last week, we had Mr. Winchell from from the tourism, the executive director of the tourism, and we were talking a little bit about the Tourist Information Center in Cognac, which is kind of limping along right now.
Correct.
So, can you update us at all about that?
Yes, and here's the backstory behind that. ODOT, a year ago, as we all know, got out of the Travel Information Center business, and we were fortunate to have a person who was there half-time last summer. Well, since then, a new contract is, let me back up, a new organization has been created. It's called Tourism Ohio, and if you've seen the advertisements on TV where they're promoting Ohio tourism, it has the O and then the H and the I inside the logo there. Well, that organization was in the process of subcontracting the contract to place pamphlets as ODOT used to do.
Right.
And so all the information packets or pamphlets should be in the rack. Well, that contract was not yet bid out as of 2 weeks ago. So my point is, without that being let out, there's no vendor to literally place those pamphlets statewide in each of our rest areas. So coincidentally, about that time, I'm a part of the tourism caucus, and we met with the new director. And she was rolling out the new tourism promotion, and that was all well and good. We saw one of the commercials, and she had mentioned that was an issue, that we didn't have anybody to literally place these things out, and it was a work in progress. Okay, so new group here doing it. I understand that. I asked her in the midst of, in fact, I was the first one to ask the question, if there were any plans on manning our stations, our travel information centers. And I use this analogy. Now, you've been to your grandmother's house years ago, right? And did she ever make cookies for you?
Yes.
Chocolate chip?
Yep.
And when Grandma made chocolate chip cookies and they were there on the plate in the kitchen, if she weren't around...
You'd grab a bunch.
And you'd leave, wouldn't you?
Yeah, oh yeah.
But if Grandma was there...
Could I have a cookie?
And you'd have a tendency to stay, and Grandma would strike up a conversation.
Right.
That same analogy applies to our tourist information centers at the gateway centers. And that's what I used, that example. That we need the human touch in the travel information centers so that people just don't grab this stuff and run. They have a chance to talk, develop a relationship with somebody there. If we're going to invest in this, and I don't know the figures yet, hundreds of thousands of dollars in advertising, promoting Ohio tourism, and we don't have somebody there to welcome visitors from out of state, then I think we've done ourselves an injustice.
Shoot yourself in the foot.
Exactly. So that very afternoon, I had my aide reach out to her office. We're trying to schedule an appointment, and we've sent multiple emails to her office to try and do that. Have not been returned yet, and I'm leaving for Columbus this afternoon. That's on the top of my list to try and nail down an appointment so I can get her ear and make a strong case, along with some of my other colleagues who have gateway travel information centers, to point out that fallacy. We have to invest in human resources in order to make this picture clear.
Mark Winchell was on the show and he's talking about all the things that are going on and all the things we have here and all. But people coming into the state, they don't know. And you know, you think of yourself, if you're going into Idaho, you probably figure there's nothing until you get to Boise, right?
Right.
So, you know, people are like, well, I'm in Ohio now, I got 60 miles, I'll be in Cleveland, I can go to the lake there, that's where the lake is, that's where different things are.
Right.
But there is so much of that here.
Exactly, and it's important to caveat. And with the 70th anniversary of D-Day coming up, let alone all the other events that we have in Northeast Ohio, it's critical to put somebody there. So that's the message I'm going to take to her, and let's close the loop and build these relationships so that people stop, pause, think about what we have here in this great gateway to the rest of Ohio.
Okay. So does it look like eventually we will have somebody manning that most of the time?
In my perfect world, yes. And even if we could get that person out there during the summer months, I know tourism tapers off in the winter, I get that, but let's promote it from May to October.
Yeah.
For goodness sake, we need somebody out there. It doesn't have to be in nighttime, I get that too, but in the peak travel hours, this new agency ought to be able to see the value of the human touch in the gateway.
Other states do it.
Yes, and if Ohio supposedly is the heart of it all and we want to welcome people here, we ought to add that. So I'm working on behalf of this district and the people of Conneaut to do just that.
And it's not just Conneaut, but Ashtabula, because, I mean, you might be able to get some information at the tourism bureau has, but you're all the way to Saybrook then.
Right.
You're almost out. It's nice for Geneva, but...
And signage is a key there too. Mark and I have talked about that, and we're working on a project hopefully to be able to get more visibility for that particular location too. And he is centrally located. I mean, that's a good location for to disperse throughout the county, but we need to emphasize the travel information center.
Coming into this.
Exactly. So I'm working on that.
Okay. Now, last week the school board started talking about, in Conneaut, that, you know, I know that there have been attempts at passing levies before and it hasn't worked out. So they finally pretty much cut and cut and cut.
Right.
And you're a retired educator, so you know what it's like.
Yes.
So, is there any hope as far as the state goes? No.
No. We have to live on hope. We have to have faith the size of a mustard seed that can move mountains.
You know,
yes.
Before you get into that, I had two library directors on the show last week.
Yes.
And I told them about a story that said the state's talking about refunding libraries again. And both of their comments were, we heard that before.
Yeah, I know, and I have a very good relationship with my librarians throughout the county, and I support what they do too. I'm also a member of the Henderson Memorial Library Foundation in Jefferson, and as a former teacher, I get the importance of libraries. So we're working on that too. But let me back up a bit and give you an overall picture, and then we'll get right into education.
Okay.
We all know that we need economic development. There's no doubt about it. Job creation is critical to revive not only this district but the state. And the governor has said time and time again, it's all about jobs. Well, there are two critical important, the top two essential elements in terms of retaining and or attracting new employment. Number two is infrastructure development. And that's roads, bridges, sewer lines, water lines, that sort of thing. And a quick aside here. I know there's going to be issues when the Route 20 bridge is out at Amboy. Yes. I understand that. But it's critical to replace that for our infrastructure. I know 90 has been a pain the last few years. But when it's done, it's going to be virtually new from the state line all the way into Lake County.
Yeah.
And that's important as well. And they're working on the bridge at 11 and 90. I mean, we're going to have to deal with some temporary inconveniences here for the long-term impact. So infrastructure, critically important. But the number one ingredient that business, commerce, industry looks for when in their whole equation is an educated workforce. And to do that, we have to invest in public education. Now we've shortchanged recently. There have been, and I'm sure if you talk to the superintendents, they would tell you, and the treasurers would certainly tell you that. Which is why I, as elected, and I promised I would do this, began to work on education funding. And the Education Funding Caucus had its 5th meeting last week. And we've looked at different things, the costs of transportation, for example. The fellow who was able to orchestrate Lakeside's new busing routes to bring busing back without additional cost spoke last week, for example.
In Columbus?
In Columbus,
oh, okay.
To the Education Funding Caucus. It's a bipartisan group. Just a quick recap here. There are 21 members, 11 Democrats, 10 Republicans from both the House and the Senate. There are various members, various superintendents from districts attend our meetings, and interested parties. The Ohio State School Board Association and the Buckeye Association of School Superintendents and different organizations like that. The Ohio Education Association sometimes sends a rep. We're here to have open, frank conversations about funding. And it's not just about throwing more dollars at it. It's about being as efficient as we can and spending those dollars wisely. And the most critical component, and Ed Fitzgerald came out recently in favor of this, is additional funding for pre-K education. Those kids have to come to school ready to move forward. All right, so how are we going to do that? That's spending money efficiently. I mean, it's not just that anymore, it's spending money efficiently. And at the other end, we have to revive programs such as elementary art, music, phys ed, and consumer science, and some of those, so that kids have an ability to check out the smorgasbord of education, so that we have people who are well-rounded. All right, so here's what's going on. There is an individual, and he was quoted in yesterday's Columbus Dispatch. There's some discrepancies. Some wealthier districts feel that they're not getting their fair share of the education piece. His name is Howard Fleeter. At any rate, this fellow has been working with the Education Funding Caucus to come up with a better formula. There are 2 components to this problem. We've got to stop the bleeding now, and in the long run, we have to come up with a better funding policy. So let's look at the first one first. In terms of funding now, there are 3 components that chew up a great deal of schools' budget. Mm-hmm. And kids, it simply costs more. Students with special needs, right, and we would expect that. Mm-hmm. English as second language learners, and we would expect that. And children of poverty, and we would expect that. Statewide, and this is embarrassing, 45% of our children are on free or reduced lunches. And I have a hunch the percentage is actually higher because some parents will not take out those forms. So it could very well be 50%.
More than half.
More than half, easily.
Wow.
And those kids require more funding. So what we need to do is be able to allocate in the current formula more funding for schools who have higher concentrations of those children. That would be the best way to pump more money into those schools in a fair, adequate, and equitable way in the short run. So we're working on that component. Now in the long run, and this is where the big lift is, we have to figure out a way to better fund our schools. I understand we have an over-reliance on the property tax. No doubt about it.
This is the age-old question.
It is, and it goes back to the founding of Ohio. How do we do it? I believe that there has to be a better balance struck between property taxes and the income tax and the sales tax. And if we could ever close the loophole on the internet sales tax, it would be very beneficial to us. Our brick and mortar stores are losing hundreds of millions of dollars because people buy online. They're supposed to pay the tax, but we know how that goes.
Voluntarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it hurts us both in terms of the local interaction with our stores, but also state revenue. Bottom line is, we need, in a bipartisan way, to address this revenue-generating
dilemma?
Machinery, yes, so that we can make funding fair, adequate, and sustainable. And it's going to take a great deal of effort on all our parts. Education is an investment. If we do not invest in our children early on, we're going to pay a heck of a price later down the road, because if they don't get the proper education, if they don't move into the workforce, how are they going to support themselves?
But, okay, you were in an office at the time, but when the whole economy went in the toilet, the tank, and the legislature looks at what we're going to do to balance the budget,
right.
They say, first of all, before that, it was all about increasing math and increasing science and getting kids to pass these tests and stuff. Then it was time to cut money. Let's take it out of education.
Right. And they cut funding to the non-essential, in their view, non-essential courses. I mean, here's where accountability plays into this whole picture. And I serve on the Education Committee, and we're hearing some very heated debate now concerning accountability, SB 229, if you're keeping a scorecard at home. Bottom line is this: if you're a school superintendent and your money's been cut and you're being evaluated on your test scores, what programs are you going to cut first? Those that aren't tested.
Right.
And that would be the art, music, gym, and all the extracurriculars and things. But that's not the way, truly, to provide a quality across-the-board education. So we have to admit that we have to offer those services for our children, and we have to have accountability, and that is going to force us to look at this whole equation differently. Now, let me explain to you something else, too. I have been at 3 GED ceremonies at Lake Erie Correctional Institution.
Yeah.
And I've talked to some of the guys. It's great when you see their parents, their children coming in to celebrate what ought to have been their high school graduation, but now they're getting their GED inside the prison. I've asked them, what should I, as a state legislator, do so that students don't end up
where
they are?
Yeah.
Bottom line is, teach them to read. Make sure they get an education so they're not as inclined to move down that pathway. And you can read articles about the school to prison pipeline, and it's kind of scary. We have to get these kids early. We have to give them an education the best we can, while making sure that it's a fair system of taxation to do just that. And the problem here in Ohio, and especially in Northeast Ohio, we have an aging population. More and more baby boomers are moving into retirement years, and they are on fixed incomes.
Right.
And we can't really raise property taxes. It's not fair to them, and yet we do have these children who need an education. So it is a difficult and complex issue, but we have to keep hope that we can fix this thing.
Put charter schools into the...
Oh my goodness, $800 million we spent on charters last year. And the problem is, of all the schools in Ohio, the bottom third underperforming or not performing schools are charters. And I signed on to I co-sponsored a piece of legislation a few weeks ago demanding public accountability, public auditing of charter schools. We need to know,
if
we're giving them the money, we ought to be able to know what it's being spent on. And there are horror stories out there of superintendents making sure their family members have a job, or principals having their own car to drive at the expense of the business. Charter schools exist to make a profit, and I get that. It's capitalism. But, and I do believe that parents know best where to send their child. Maybe it's homeschool, maybe it's public school, maybe it's a parochial school. I understand choice, I get that. But if any institution accepts public money, it must be subject to public scrutiny. That only makes sense. And that isn't the case currently. And that is a great black hole of public spending. If we can close that gap, and another issue that's related to that is open enrollment and how much that costs certain districts. That's another part of this whole education funding puzzle.
It is not simple. Last week, the House acted on legislation dealing with taxing. Hold on a second. Let's take a call. Hello, you're on the air.
Morning, Bob. Good morning, John.
Hi.
I guess my comment is more of a comment than it is a question. you know, you were mentioning the aging population in northeastern Ohio that can't really support more levies and so forth. The problem is, I see, is the fact that we don't have the jobs to attract younger people. And if we had the jobs, then we would have a younger population, and in turn would create more tax base for schools and improvement in everything. So I see on John Kasich's advertisement as he runs for a second term that he's created 350,000 jobs or something to that effect. We have not seen no new jobs in this area. And so I think we're kind of like the lost corner of the state. So if Mr. Kasich wants to impress me, he needs to start creating jobs in this area. And I think that's about the biggest thing I can say. And then on the tourism front there, I think we should be able to stick our tourism maps out at the tourism center for free instead of being charged to put them out there on the local board of tourism. And we're being charged to put our maps out there, which is promoting business in the area and so forth through the whole county. And we're being charged for that. And it's kind of ironic that local businesses allow us to put the maps in their business because they see the thing behind the maps that it promotes their businesses. It's free advertisement. And yet the state wants to charge us to put maps out at our own tourism center that public dollars funded. So I guess that's the two things I wanted to comment on, and maybe you want to comment back or whatever. I'm going to hang up and let you talk.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
That point about charging,
yes.
What's the concept of that?
I agree. I agree. We've already paid for it. That's the problem. There's some things that just ought not to be privatized. And essentially, when ODOT has washed its hands of the Travel Information Center and the state entered into a contract with the firm who is making money, then they're going to charge for that placement simply because we've privatized it. We never should have let that go, but it is what it is now. And I agree wholeheartedly, and that's another issue that we have.
Privatizing everything isn't the answer.
No.
Prisons? I don't...
I have an issue with that too, because there are reasons why some business endeavors are privatized and others aren't. Where there's a profit to be made, where there can be competition, where there's not a service offered, then privatization works wonderfully well. That's a capitalistic dream. But there are other elements of a service that shouldn't be profitized, and that's where we kind of get into this mixed bag right now. And the drive in the current administration has been to privatize a lot of things. And we could get into that.
The Turnpike, that never...
No, thankfully not.
Yeah,
if you've been on the Pennsylvania Turnpike recently, they've raised tolls dramatically because we were going the same route that Pennsylvania did.
Didn't Indiana do that too?
Yes, and I was on the Indiana Turnpike, and the maintenance was horrible, and the lines were terribly long because they did not... The greatest cost is the human cost. So in Indiana, they automated a lot of the toll booths. So if somebody's credit card didn't work, or didn't go through, or they didn't have the right change, we waited. My brother-in-law and his wife live in Wisconsin, so we travel out 90 through around the Chicago area. We waited in line one time for 20 minutes just to pay a toll because it was right after they had privatized. And oh yeah, they saved money, but at whose cost?
Yeah.
So my point is, when you're running something that's a service, privatization doesn't always work. So I agree with the caller, there has to be a different way of doing this, but I can only fight so many battles at a time.
And you are the minority.
Deep minority, yes.
Yeah.
So we work on that.
Tell me before we go.
Yeah.
Is the gridlock as bad in state government between Republicans and Democrats as it is in the U.S. Congress?
Well, I can't comment on Congress because I'm not there.
Right.
I can tell you in the State House, I get along with all of my colleagues. We may disagree on principle and philosophy, but it's amicable. And for me to get anything done for our people, for what they jokingly sometimes call Canada.
Uh-huh.
And Canada are interchangeable in their minds. I've got a story to tell you recently about that. I have to be able to work with the other side. That's the bottom line. Doesn't mean I sacrifice my principles, but I have to see things from their perspective so that I understand what motivates them to try and get legislation through. And that's just reality of the situation. There's 60 votes on their side, 39 on ours. I cannot move from a principle of wishing things were different. I have to live in reality.
Yes.
Friday, here's a cute story. Representative Boyce, who was very much interested in prison and prison reform and such. In fact, Conneaut's Lake Erie was the 6th one he visited, so we helped arrange a visit for him to come up. Now Representative Boyce lives in Columbus, and the night before he was coming up, we got out late from session. He said, "I'll see you tomorrow, John." And I said, "Okay, Kevin, no problem. How long will it take?" I said, "Well, traveling from Columbus to Conneaut, if you don't stop and you're going legal speed, it's going to take you about 3.5 hours without a stop." He said, "What? Over 3 hours?" I said, "Well, yeah, because when you're coming to the Lake Erie Correctional Facility, you're just a tee shot in a 3-wood from the Pennsylvania line and about the same distance from the lake, literally." He said, "You got to be kidding me." He said, "No, this is a reality." He said, "You drive that all the time?" "Yes, I do." "You think I had it bad?" George and Debbie drove that for years. In fact, George Distel is fond of telling the story. He's closer to Toronto than he is Columbus.
He talked about staying at a motel or something, get the same room every time.
Oh yeah.
So it's not a glamorous.
Oh no. It's a German Village Inn and the government rate. And I started down there. It's $46 a night, and it's a reputable facility. But sometimes, because it's a mom and pop organization, I get down there after a committee or a meeting up here. I get down there 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and there were times that it was difficult to wake up because there's nobody on the desk. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to be in committee the next morning, and I want to get some rest, and my car is not the best, my escape is not the best thing to sleep in. Finally, another legislator took me in, and we share an apartment. It's a 1-bedroom apartment. He has the bedroom, and my bed is actually in the living room. And it has running water.
Wow.
Yeah, we have a microwave and a fridge. It's like being back in college. The fridge is empty.
It's adorable.
Oh my gosh. But my share is $240, $250 a month. And the utilities, it cost me $26 last month for my utilities because we're never there. We're never there. But I found that the time that I was spending down there was actually cheaper over the course of a year to share an apartment with somebody else. And I have a bed, a nightstand, and a chair there, and that's it. It's pretty Spartan. Hey, pretty Spartan living, right? That's what we want.
That's right. That's right.
But and then he asked the other question about economic development. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And I spend most of my waking time working on economic development. Reality tells us we're not going to get a Ford or a GM to move in anytime soon. So what do we already do that we can do better and create more jobs? Well, one is tourism and the promotion of tourism. The second one is agriculture.
Yes.
And with the world's population soon to reach 9 billion by 2050, we have the ability to grow and distribute because we have the transportation system. The link that's missing is the processing. If we can close the processing links, we can then ship around the world. So I agree. It is about job creation. It's about jobs that fit our area well and bringing young people back. And the other thing that's intriguing, just to finish on this point, the millennial generation, many of them work from their home, computers and such. And that being said, I've read some research that indicates these young people are willing to move to an area where there's a quality of life. An excellent quality of life. Now, what does that mean? It means there's excellent schools for their children. It means there's recreational things, parks, and things like that. We have 3 scenic rivers in this county alone. We have 3 major lakes, Erie, Pymatuning, and the largest private lake in Ohio, Roaming Shores.
Right.
We have a bike trail that spans the county.
Yes.
And we have to invest in our parks. The fishing, I mean, there are people from around the world who fly in to fish Conneaut Creek. We have, in hunting, my goodness gracious, we have a wonderful quality of life here. So my vision is to continue to improve and enhance our quality of life so that we can keep our young people here. As a teacher, I've seen generation after generation leave for jobs. We're not going to get all of them, but if we can get some of them back to live here, what price would we pay to be able to be close to our grandchildren?
Yes.
That is, in a word, priceless.
Yes.
So there's an investment to be made in education and our quality of life to open up that venue of new jobs here that will create our tax base. So again, it's a multi-tiered formula.
We were going to talk a little bit before you get on your way about the legislation about drilling and fracking and that sort of thing.
Severance tax.
Severance tax?
Yes. A complicated piece. Everything's complicated.
It is.
That was passed by the House last week. And first I want to point out that the voting was mixed. There were Republicans and Democrats on both sides of this issue.
Okay.
And the notion is this, that as we take oil and gas out of the ground, we have severed those products from the area in which they were. So hence the term severance tax. And there has been a debate, there was a bill introduced back in December, Representative Huffman, to increase the severance tax. And the governors wanted to increase that as well. The governor's plan was 4%, the original was 2.25%. States around us have higher severance taxes. And so the idea was to raise the severance tax, but then offer an income tax cut with it. And then you have the notion of, well, where does this money go? If we're having a tax in addition to the tax cut, what should happen? Well, there is damage to roads and bridges when the trucks are in. Now, we haven't seen it in Northeast Ohio. We get a little bit of it with injection wells, and that's a whole different issue, and I'm still working on that.
Okay.
I have not forgotten. In fact, that's on the top of my list, those two, Travel Information Center and the injection well, when I get to Columbus. But Eastern Ohio, Carroll County, for example, Belmont County, where they are seeing the heavy drilling right now, it has done some tremendous damage to roads and bridges. Even though some of them have RUMAs, Road Use Maintenance Agreement, with their county engineers, there's still damage there. There's also the increase in labor, and sometimes, and this is especially true in North Dakota, as these workers come in and bring their children, there's increased demand on the public schools. There are also some problems for law enforcement too. With increased wealth comes the increased possibility of, how can I say this, recreational usage of some of that funds. Drugs, prostitution, some of the unseemly elements of society follow the drillers around, hoping to, it's like the Old West to the gold mining towns. The problems are the same, the actors are different. So it adds more to law enforcement in their activity. So bottom line is, some of this money ought to go to those communities to help offset the costs.
Right.
Well, now the question is, how do we divvy that up? Does the rest of the state of Ohio deserve a tax credit when these people here are bearing the brunt? Philosophically, you have to ask that question. And what is the balance between the two? I mean, obviously, if there is a tax cut and people have more money to spend, they will indeed spend it. So the question is, how much and to whom? And how much, three essential questions here. How high should the tax go and not dissuade drillers to come in? That's one argument in and of itself. How much should be divvied out across the state in terms of income tax cuts? And how much then, thirdly, should be left to the areas who are indeed experiencing the boom in fracking? And that's where, I don't want to get into the weeds, although we can, but for the sake of the listeners' understanding, those were the three major areas of debate. within this whole package of the severance tax. So some felt in the eastern counties that it wasn't enough to offset the losses. And admittedly, if you look at the average, the cut that they're talking about, the average Ohioan will get somewhere between $20 and $40 back.
So he's using the pizza analogy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I felt that, and I could see where we're going to be caught in this shale play soon, that it wasn't enough coming back to our local governments because the state has already cut those funds. And I'm sure you're aware, if you've talked to any city managers or city treasurers and such, that the local governments have been harmed, and that's another battle that we fight, some of us, to restore that funding to local governments. So was the tax high enough? Was the dispersal fair? And is it fair to those communities where the action is? Until the votes played out, I think the bottom line was 55-35 on the floor of the House, and it's going over to the Senate now. The governor wanted more. They didn't give it to him, so we'll see what happens. But I think the Senate's going to do some tweaking on that, and we'll see what happens. But the other thing to consider in all of this, speaking of taxes, is the fact in the last budget we eliminated the rollback on new money too. New levies that are coming out, and I voted against that budget, and this was one of many reasons why I did. When new levies are asked for, the first 10% is a rollback. That was a deal that was made clear back in the early 70s when we went to an income tax, so it didn't hit Ohioans hard. If we're going to have an income tax, we've got to give them a break somewhere else.
Right.
So the first 10% was the so-called rollback, and 12% if you lived in that particular home, in that homestead. And we've also pulled back the homestead exemption for seniors, which is problematic, especially for our district. So what has happened in Columbus is simply a tax shift. The budget has increased from 50-some billion to a little over 60 billion, so there's more money coming in. But we've taken money from schools, taken money from local governments, and reallocated some of put the burden really on the local governments and on the schools and such as they raise money to fill the gap. Without the rollback, without the homestead exemption moving forward, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult.
So you may be able to get a couple of pizzas out of the deal, but you're looking at higher taxes for your libraries, for your schools.
And don't forget, we increased the sales tax too.
Right, that's right.
And that affects everybody. Which
was kind of funny, and this is something we discussed last week, but you know, a couple of years ago when the county was in such bad shape and there was a huge controversy, the commissioners tried to pass on their own a sales tax increase. One commissioner said no, it went on the ballot, it failed miserably, and then the state just kind of raises it, and you know, c'est la vie.
That's right. That's right. So when we're looking at the composition of the legislature and who is going to be leading Ohio, we have to keep those factors in mind as we move forward. There is a price to civilization, and we have to figure out how we're going to pay it fairly, equitably, and those are intelligent discussions and debates that we ought to be having.
This is a good time to have it.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much for stopping in.
Always a pleasure.
Yes. Till the next time. I joke we go to different events and stuff, and I see John there, and I say, well, I'll see you again tomorrow, the day after, whatever event's going on. And he's there.
And that's important. I feel if I'm going to represent our people down there, I need to know what's on their mind. I need to be accessible. And for me, living in Jefferson, it's DeConnie, it's Deschardin, it's Geneva, Down County, Ashton, Beulah. I try to get out as much as I can. So I know what's on the minds of our people here, because we're one happy family working together. Right. And that's my dream, working together for the benefit of all.
Right.
Benefit of all.
All right. Thank you for coming by.